Keep us muted.
I don't hear them.
Huh?
I don't hear them.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Brighton Council Planning Meeting of October 12th, 2021. I'll call this meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. by recognizing the traditional keepers of this land and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the municipality of Brighton is located on the Mississauga-Anishinaabe territory and is the traditional territory of the Mississauga. The Council of the Municipality of Brighton respectfully acknowledges that the Mississauga Nation are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that Council approve the October 12th, 2021 planning agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. And I will note we've had regrets from Councillor Tadman, and Councillor Rowley is joining us via the electronic conference technology. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. They're none noted. We have had one delegation register. It's Ruth Aulthouse from RFA Planning Consultants. I understand that Ruth may not wish to proceed with her delegation, but I'll let Ruth speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm here on behalf of Brighton Meadows Subdivision AMR Investments and Paul Quick Construction, just to speak to you very briefly about the letter that I wrote to you on October the 5th, where I outlined some concerns about the proposed clause in the subdivision agreement that would require that 10% of the units that were single detached and semi-detached in Brighton Meadows would be defined as units for secondary apartment units. Since that time of writing that letter, we've been working with the planning staff, and there is a proposed revised wording that will be presented this evening to council, where the 10% requirement clause will still apply for this second units within the subdivision for singles and semis, but the timing of that clause is now at the building permit stage, and the owner is able to have the condition waived to reflect market conditions, and where market conditions apply is defined in the new wording presented this evening. The first submission for Brighton Meadows, I would remind council, was about 2 years ago, and there's been 2 submissions since that time. Over that period of time, we've worked very closely, especially in the last year, with the Brighton planning staff, and I wanted to thank Paul Walsh and Josh Berry for their efforts in bringing this forward to the council this evening for draft plan approval. My clients do agree with all of the draft plan conditions that will be presented later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate that very much. Are there any questions of clarification from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ruth, if you remember 2 years ago when you came in front of council, I asked you about parking. And if the vehicles that were going to be on the semis and the detached, if they were going to be parked on the owner's property or on municipal property, and your answer was that they were going to use the road, they could park on the road. And that's one question. The second question is the distance that you have on your side property to the line. Is it 1.2 meters, the minimal standard acceptable?
So Ruth, before you answer those questions, your delegation was specific to the 10% additional use in the dwelling. So Councillor LeBlanc, your questions are better left to the statutory public or to the staff report.
Mayor, do you apply to this?
No, not to the delegation, they don't. But you can certainly ask those questions during the staff report.
Well, you'll see that they apply in the staff report.
Well, we will see that they apply at the staff report because you can ask your questions then. Thank you. Any other questions of clarification for the delegation? Councillor Anderson?
Just for clarification, the 10% is based on market at what time? And you mentioned that at the building permit time. Can you just tell me how that plays out?
Well, perhaps the detailed wording, I believe Josh is going to be presenting that this evening, but there are clauses related to the at the time of the final 10% of the units, if they haven't been utilized for the secondary apartments, and if there are no offers of offer of purchase and sale, where there are buyers that want to have these secondary apartments put in the dwelling units, that condition can be waived after that period of 60 days. So there is wording. I'm not 100% clear. I've been shown the wording that was prepared this afternoon, and I believe that Josh will be presenting that as part of his staff report.
That's good, Ruth. So it's going to wait until all the units are sold before that kicks in as such.
Well, there is the possibility, of course, that the builders will find purchasers as the lots are being sold, as the subdivision is phased in, that will want the second apartment units within the dwelling unit, and the builder will have an opportunity to present that to the purchaser with floor plans. And so that, but at the time of the final remaining 10%, if there haven't been all of the 10% utilized for that, and there are no other purchasers that wish to do so, then the condition can be waived.
So best, Councillor Anderson, to wait for the staff report at 6.1 and ask your questions of staff,
If
since
it's
they're
not
the ones
clear-
who,
If it's not clear, then
since they're the ones who develop the
Okay.
wording.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Any other questions of clarification for the delegation? Thank you again, Ruth, for your delegation. I have a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson, that Council receive the presentation from Ruth Aulthouse, President, RFA Planning Consultant Incorporated, regarding draft approval condition 14A for the Brighton Meadows Subdivision SUB 2019-03. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to our statutory public meeting. I have a motion moved by Councillor LeBlanc, and I'll need a seconder that council move into the statutory public meeting October 12th, 2021 at 6:38 p.m. It's seconded by Councillor Bateman. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Members of council, I will ask you just to hold your hands up a little while longer, because I do have to search for Councillor Rowley. I keep forgetting you're not here, Emily. You are right in front of me, but I'm looking for you down here. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the municipality of Brighton in respect of the proposed plan of subdivision, zoning bylaw amendment, or consent before the approval authority gives or refuses to give approval to it, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the municipality of Brighton to the local planning appeal tribunal. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the municipality of Brighton in respect of the proposed plan of subdivision, zoning bylaw amendment, or consent before the approval authority gives or refuses to give approval of it, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal, unless in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the municipality of Brighton in respect to the proposed plan of subdivision, zoning bylaw amendment, or consent, you must make written requests to the municipal clerk, Candace Doran. We have two items in our statutory public meeting this evening, I think. And the first is zoning bylaw amendment file number Z09 2021 with regard to additional residential units. So Mr. Barry, by what method and on what date was notice of this zoning bylaw amendment given?
Public notice of the zoning bylaw was given in compliance with the Planning Act through advertisement in the circulated newspaper, the Brighton Independent, dated September 9th, 2021, And public notice was also posted on the municipal webpage.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. And would you please explain the purpose and reason for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment?
The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment Z09-2021 is to amend section 4.9.3 additional units of the comprehensive zoning bylaw to clarify that a maximum of 2 additional units shall be permitted per lot, including 1 in the main building and 1 in the accessory building, as per the most recent legislation in the Planning Act. Additional provisions will also be introduced to the zoning bylaw to regulate parking and access to second dwelling units. Additional provisions will also be introduced to zoning bylaw to ensure additional units and detached accessory buildings are compatible with existing development.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Are there persons present or via Zoom who have questions or comments regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment? Madam Clerk, are you aware of anyone joining us for this portion? Are there any questions or comments regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
On the parking. When the have a lot. And the parking is it going to be the same as the thing that they have to be on their own owner's property and not on municipal property?
Mr. Barry?
Yeah, so the parking for additional residential units is a minimum of 1 parking space has to be provided off-street, so it have to be provided on the owner's property. We've also introduced a provision to allow tandem parking, and what tandem parking is essentially there's 2 cars in the driveway, one parks behind the other parallel. That provides additional accommodation for parking without affecting the streetscape as well.
Any other questions from members of council? Go ahead.
Yes, so when you look at the secondary dwelling, which is on the back, you say that they have to have a minimal side distance of 1.83 meters, 1.83 meters.
Yes,
And if they have a walkway, they need 1.5 meters.
correct.
But in the particular subdivision we're talking about, the side allowance on most of all the lots is 1.2 meters.
Correct.
So they wouldn't qualify for part of the 10% for the lots in the back of the area because the distance between the house and the property line is only 1.2 meters.
So I think we're getting confused between secondary dwelling units specific to a subdivision agreement and additional dwelling units that is being added to our zoning bylaw. But Mr. Barry, do you have a comment?
No, through you, Mr. Mayor. I do understand the question. So the 1.83 meters, which is 6 feet, actually applies to an additional residential unit that's attached accessory building. It does not apply to, say, basement apartments or I don't know, a side exterior addition. So that was put in there on purpose, recognizing that if they wanted to put in an attached building, it would have to be further back from the minimum side yard requirement, just because it can be a bit overbearing to have that many structures in the side yard there. So we allow for a more generous setback.
Are there any other questions from members of council? Go ahead.
If the distance is 1.2 meters from the side of the house to the property line,
Mhm.
and you need 1.5 meters for a minimal for the walkway, plus the fence, which is 1.83 meters. But we're only approving for the subdivision 1.2. So in this subdivision, they wouldn't be able to have a dwelling in the rear.
Yes, that's correct. You're right.
So in the subdivision we'll be looking at this evening, this would not be applicable to that particular subdivision because of the setbacks.
That is correct. Also to mention that this bylaw would not be in effect at that time as well. But that is certainly something we can consider revising. It wasn't our intent to do that. I was trying to comply with the accessibility provisions. I have a 1.5 meter sidewalk, but failed to recognize that it's a 1.2 meter side yard. So I can certainly look at revising some of that language and potentially including language saying notwithstanding the above. We can work on some language to address that.
True,
Yeah.
fully understanding it's a bit late for this one because the subdivision agreement's ahead of us.
Yes.
But in the future, maybe staff should look at the new subdivisions coming up, so they do comply with this. And you look at the backyards, that if they do want to have a secondary dwelling, because there's no backyards in a lot of these to build. You have
Yes.
to look at the
Yeah.
distance, because you need a setback from the back yard, the back of 3.4 meters. So it wouldn't fit. Okay, I just,
No, it's a good point. That's
thank you very much, Josh, for saying it's a good point. Appreciate it.
Thank you both. Thank you both very much. Are there any other questions from members of council?
We can just-
Oh, sorry, Councillor Rowley.
thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question, I'm wondering if these additional units, regardless of whether they're in an accessory building or in a main building, are they subject to all of the inspections that would be necessary for any other kind of building here in the municipality?
Mr. Barry?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. Yeah, they would be inspected as a full unit essentially.
Thank you.
That answer your question, Councillor Rowley?
I think so.
Thank you. Councillor LeBlanc.
Yes. I'll just for clarification for me. This is encourage the construction of additional units in the core area of the zoning where there were services available for residential to utilize. This agreement would provide for payment to the municipality in lieu of provisions for parking. The fee collected from this could be used to improve parking facilities in the core area of the CA zone. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, so I can try my best to answer what the intent of it is, and I'll rely on Mr. Walsh maybe to see how it's implemented procedurally. But the intent of that is really recognizing that we're trying to encourage people to live in the downtown core. There may be some shortages of parking on some of the more urban lots that have apartments above. The thought process is if it's possible and staff agree, we can consider reducing the requirement for a parking space, and in exchange for that, there would be a cash in lieu, kind of like cash in lieu of parkland, but instead it's dedicated to parking infrastructure in the municipality to improve potential parking shortages and deficits that exist already. Now I know, Mr. Walsh, you have some experience of Prince Edward in introducing how that works on the ground, so maybe you can give council a brief explanation.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mayor. So the Planning Act has a provision within it called parking exemption, and council has the authority to enter into parking exemption agreements with a landowner. And that parking exemption, it comes with a payment for each parking stall or spot that it's being exempted. This can be done without minor variance or other variances from the zoning bylaw. And there are existing provisions within the municipality of Brighton zoning bylaw as well, acknowledging that, although there's no really anything operational, just in principle in the zoning bylaw, it recognizes in core area zone that this is an option. And it's very common in areas such as the traditional Main Street areas where parking has historically never been in abundance oftentimes. So I believe we have a precedent in the municipality of Brighton. I'd have to research the exact dollar figure get assigned to the parking exemption agreement, but we usually do it on a spot by spot approval basis. In Prince Edward County, it's $5,000 per parking stall. And that money really should go into a parking reserve fund so that the municipality then can go about maintaining on-street or designated parking lots that it owns and operates.
Anything further from members of council? Mr. Barry, do you have any final comments?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So acknowledging that there needs to be some revisions on 2N of the zoning bylaw, staff would like to request that the bylaw is brought forward to the next council meeting with a correction to that bylaw.
So I'll ask council if they wish to make a decision this evening, and if they do, ask them if they'd like to revise the motion to refer the bylaw back to staff.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it won't be as amended because we don't know what the amendments are at this stage. So does council wish to make a decision at this time on the zoning bylaw amendment? Yes. And Councillor LeBlanc, you're the mover. On part 2 of this motion, it reads that council passes zoning bylaw amendment file number, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are you okay if we revise that to read that council refers zoning bylaw amendment as presented to staff to be brought back with amendments to the next planning meeting?
Through you, your worship, the amendments are very minor. And I have full trust in staff and Josh and Paul that they would make those amendments because it's only a matter of just a few meters that has to be done. I'd still like to pass the bylaw tonight and with them doing the amendment, the corrections.
I don't think we can do that because they'd still need to bring back the bylaw, amended bylaw for us to pass again. So it's probably just as well we refer it back, then we get a clean bylaw to pass at the next planning meeting.
Okay,
that fair?
I'll take your advice, Mayor. Thank you.
So it's moved by Councillor LeBlanc, and I'm sorry, Councillor Bateman, I should have asked if you're okay with that change in wording. Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Bateman, that council receives the staff report dated October 12th, 2021 regarding additional residential units, and further that council refers zoning bylaw amendment file number Z09-2021 as presented in this report to staff for amendments. Is there any further discussion? Those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rowley, did you have a question?
Yes, I do, please, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Once again, just for some clarification, just listening to Mr. Barry regarding the parking, I would just like to think about that a little bit. Would I have opportunity before the next council meeting just to speak to him about that and see if maybe we need to add something else? Would that be okay? Or are we just going to amend the setbacks that Councillor LeBlanc was speaking about?
I think you have opportunity to speak to Mr. Barry in advance because my anticipation would this would come to the next planning meeting, so we're a month away.
Okay, thank you very much.
Don't wait too long. A month goes by quickly, as you know.
I know, but he just gave me something else to think about, and I just want to kind of mull it around before I ask any questions. So I'll speak to Mr. Barry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything further from members of council? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Next item in our statutory public meeting are files B13 2021 and Z10 2021. The applicant is Linkswood Farms Incorporated with regard to 947 Cameron Road. The purpose of this portion of the public meeting is to consider a decision of council regarding a consent application and a zoning bylaw amendment application for surplus dwelling and severance. Mr. Barry, by what method and on what date was notice of this consent and zoning bylaw amendment applications given?
Public notice of the applications was given in accordance with the Planning Act. Notice of the public meeting was mailed to all landowners within 120 meters of the subject lands. A public notice sign was also posted on the property.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. And would you please explain the purpose and reason for the proposed consent and zoning bylaw amendment applications and what the applications would accomplish?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the purpose of the consent application is to create one new law as a surplus farm dwelling severance. The proposed separate law is to have an area of 2 acres with a frontage of 61 meters, 200 feet on Cameron Road. The retained lands will have a lot area of approximately 21.25 acres with 456 feet of frontage on Cameron Road. Zoning bylaw amendment will rezone the severed lands to the special rural residential 52 zone to recognize the existing single detached dwelling and accessory buildings. And the retained land will be rezoned to the special agricultural 36 zone to prohibit residential uses and to recognize the proposed lot area of 8.6 hectares and a lot frontage of 139 meters.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Does the owner or applicant wish to make any comments this evening? Is staff aware if the owner or applicant are joining us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the applicant is harvest season right now, so he asked that we just continue with the meeting.
Very well.
Yeah.
Are there any persons present who have questions or comments regarding tonight's proposed applications? Madam Clerk, are you aware of anyone joining us for this portion of the statutory public meeting? there any questions or comments regarding the proposed applications from members of council? Councilor Bateman.
Just a quick comment. I have no issues with this, especially when it comes to farmland that is worked by the farmers, because nobody knows better than them where a dwelling should be placed, and they don't give up their prime farmland. They usually pick a spot that isn't. So, none of us here are qualified to tell a farmer what land is the best, nor is any other agency. So I'm good with this.
Well, you'd think that was true, but there are people in downtown Toronto who think they know better than the rest of us too. So there you go. Mr. Barry, it's not typical for us to allow a severance on farmable land. I know this is an additional unit that a local agricultural business has picked up. Could you just speak to the policy around this, please?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's so as in accordance with the provincial policy statement, which is the overarching policy document for land use planning in Ontario, severances are prohibited for residential uses on prime agricultural land, with the exception being a surplus dwelling. And what essentially that is when a farmer buys land to expand their farming operation, they don't want to be landlords. They don't have a use for the home. So the home is severed to allow them to continue farming the farmland. And then the condition is that the farmland is rezoned to prohibit any residential uses. So therefore, you're just it's just for existing development. You're not encouraging any new development in the agricultural area.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Any further questions or comments from members of council? And I officially ask if the owner applicant wish to make any final comments, but I understand that that's not going to happen. And Mr. Barry, do you have any final comments?
Not at this time.
And does council wish to make a decision this evening? Yep. With that, I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Connect, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc, that council receives a staff report regarding consent application B13 2021 and zoning bylaw amendment application Z10 2021 for the lands located at 947 Cameron Road, described as part of Lot 31 Concession 7, and that council enacts a bylaw to rezone the property located at 947 Cameron Road, described as part of Lot 31 Concession 7, from the Special Agricultural 2 zone to the Special Rural Residential 52 zone and the Special Agricultural 36 zone. And further, that council grant provisional consent to application B13 2021, subject to the following conditions. Each condition shall be fulfilled no later than 1 year from the date of the mailing of the decision. The application for the zoning bylaw amendment Z10 2021 is finally approved. Clear title is confirmed with the municipality for the land subject to the road allowances of Cameron Road and Goodfellow Road to the municipality, including any additional width needed to accommodate the existing traveled roads, shoulders, and drainage works, all to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services. If the roadway is deficient in width from the center line, the applicant lay out and dedicate by deed to the municipality of Brighton along Cameron Road a strip of land ensuring a minimum of 10 meters from the center line of Cameron Road along the frontage of the severed lands and retained lands for the purpose of road widening. If the roadway is deficient in width from the center line along Goodfellow Road, the applicant lay out and dedicate by deed to the municipality of Brighton a strip of land ensuring a minimum of 10 meters from the center line of Goodfellow Road along the frontage of the retained lands for the purposes of road widening. In meeting conditions 4 and 5 above, any lands conveyed to the municipality shall be free from any encumbrances to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works and Infrastructure, including free from any encroaching fences, building structures, or problem trees. The owner applies for and obtains an entrance permit and civic address for the existing field entrance and the retained lands. All taxes on both the severed and retained lots be in compliance with municipal requirements prior to the issuance of a certificate of official. The applicant submits via email to planning@brighton.ca deposited plan of reference of the severed lands, including any required road widening or easement. A digital copy of this final survey is to be geo-referenced and provided in a suitable format via email or USB to the municipality. And the applicant provides the municipality with a registrable description on a deed conveying the severed lands for use for the issuance of a certificate for consent. Any questions or comments from members of council? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And those are the two items for our statutory public meeting. I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Connect, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc, that council move out of the statutory public meeting October 12th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. That takes us to planning and development reports. Our first report is with regard to Brighton Meadows application for plan of subdivision. Mr. Barry, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Yes, I believe there's an amended recommendation that's been presented to reflect the market conditions clause that Ms. Ferguson Aulthouse was referring to in her deputation.
And it is written here in my motion for council's reference when it gets read.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Is that your highlight, sir?
That's my highlight.
Thank you.
Yes.
So it's moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that the report of the Planning and Development Department dated October 12th, 2021 regarding subdivision file number sub 2019-03 is received. That draft plan of subdivision file number sub 2019-03 for the lands described as part of lots 3 and 4 concession 1 parts 1 to 3 of plan 39R 11840, part 1 of plan 39R 9894, part of part 1 of plan 39R 10910, part of parts 1 to 4 of plan 38R 1408, and part of lots 29 to 31 on registered plan 28 be approved upon official plan amendment number 7 to the municipality of Brighton official plan coming into force and effect, subject to the conditions presented in attachment number 4, with condition 14B being amended to note the following. And here's the information you all need to note. Notwithstanding the above, the owner can request the municipality to remove the requirement for a minimum number of additional residential units to reflect market conditions, provided that the owner has entered into a bona fide agreements of purchase and sale for all but 10% of the lots. The owner shall not notify the municipality. If any of the remaining 10% of the lots remain unsold for a period of 60 days thereafter, the owner shall be entitled to sell the said remaining lots without the obligation to complete additional secondary units upon them. And the municipality shall issue the owner building permits to complete single detached dwellings or semi-detached dwellings upon the remaining lots. And that council authorized the planning staff to issue a notice of draft approval of the plan of subdivision upon official plan amendment number 7 to the municipality of Brighton official plan coming into force and effect. Is there any discussion from members of council? Councillor Anderson.
After the discussion we had earlier about the property lines and that, would this have any basis right now at this point? If once they start selling, that if they don't have that size property to start with, are they going to be able to do this?
Mr. Barry.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So that provision that we were discussing earlier tonight is not actually in effect yet. So that bylaw is deferred. The current bylaw does not make any reference to that sidewalk provision. So the minimum 1.2 would apply. So theoretically, if they got their approval, but the time the appeal period expired, then the new bylaw would be in effect. But yes, in theory, they could just build with the current setbacks.
So do they have to show that these types of properties are available from the outset, that they are available and they are ready, they're on the market? Or do they have to wait until 10% aren't sold before they put them on the market?
Mr. Barry.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Would you mind just reframing your question? I'm just trying to understand.
I'm just saying, this all leans to waiting until there's 10% or of the lots that are left, right? Based on market conditions, whether there's the first ones are sold or not. Are they able to, is it expected that they would have some of these lots on the market from day one?
Yes, my understanding is all the lots would be sold per phase. So phase 1, I can't remember the number of units off the top of my head, but it's approximately half of the development. They would sell those lots and they would be offering a package to potential buyers with a purpose-built second unit.
So is there something in there that states that?
The subdivision agreement includes the requirement for 10%. Have right from the get-go.
Okay, that's,
This additional thing that says, if you're having trouble selling them and you get to the sellout period, come back to us and let us know that the market isn't bearing what we think it will bear.
I know, initially you might sell a few of them.
Right now, they are required to sell 10% with additional units
Okay,
or secondary units. pardon.
I just want to make sure it's moving ahead.
as of
not-
right now.
Moving ahead, not being sat on.
It's not being sidelined. It's just, this is written as I think a worry. There's a concern that maybe the market won't bear. I'm less worried about it.
Yeah, I am too, but I'm just saying, I want to see it happen.
Yeah, that's the intent.
And I want to hope they could sell all of their properties.
That's the intent of the draft condition. It's essentially an exit clause, as the mayor had explained. Yeah.
Excuse me for being so, I
Yeah.
want to be particular on it.
I understand. Councilor Blanc, you had some questions with regard to parking and setbacks, et cetera.
No, the parking is, we addressed it.
Okay, thank you.
That's already addressed. The other one is just for Councilor Anderson. If you remember, we approved 4 duplexes off of Foxton, Deerhurst, and basically they ended up by being quadplexes. And we didn't have this bylaw in effect, so they all became secondary dwellings. So it depends what the owners want and what they build. So this builder has already done that for us. So without even this bylaw in place. So I have no problems with this bylaw at all as it reads.
Thank you. Councilor Bateman.
Either for the director or Josh, just for clarification, my understanding there's 100 and some units proposed, correct?
I believe it's 171 was the latest plan, if I'm not mistaken.
So theoretically or in reality, every one of those units can become a second dwelling. It depends on the home buyer, correct? Like when they purchase it, what they wish to do with it. Because my understanding in conversations with yourself, the director, and that the homes are going to be built in such a way that they're sold with unfinished basements and the buyer can decide whether they want a finished basement. And everything, really the heavy lifting, so to speak, will be done to create a second dwelling, making it that much easier for somebody if they decide at the time of buying or even 3 years down the road, if they'd like to turn it into a second dwelling. So the cost will be much lower because the windows, the plumbing and everything is already in place to do such a thing, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and through discussions with the builder, I understand they actually have purpose-built models that they'll be marketing to buyers. So that'll be a package that you could add on to your home, and then another package. That's one option. You do the fully custom-built second unit. The second option could be, I'm not sure yet. Maybe I'll just put rough ends, and they can also offer that as a package as well. But when they come in for a permit to do the second unit, then they would have to meet the requirements of the building code.
Go ahead.
Just a follow-up comment. So in reality, you could have started out with 10%, but 5 years from now, because all that's roughed in and it's there, somebody might make the decision based on what they're going through in their economic life. Hey, we could use a second dwelling, and it's pretty much a lot easier than creating a second dwelling from scratch. So we could end up with 50%, 60%, who knows from 5 years from now.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Just for clarification on that question, it's their choice to rough in for a second unit, right? They're going to have unfinished basements, but it doesn't mean they're all going to be automatically roughed in.
That's correct. Yes, it's up to them. That'll be a package. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And just, I think a point of clarification, not all 171 units are singles or semis. There are some towns in there. So I think the number is 130 some that are singles and semis that could have these secondary dwellings. Is that?
Yeah,
correct?
that's correct. In terms of the 10% provision as it's applied in the conditions, it would apply to only singles and semis, which would be approximately 131, I think it is. But in terms of the actual bylaw itself, the Planning Act does allow you to put a second unit in row home. So if someone did want to do that in a row home, they could. We're just not requiring that as a draft condition, recognizing that townhomes are a more attainable form of housing than singles and semis are.
Deputy Mayor.
And for these second units, are these houses, see, that's the thing, if they decide to do it later, are they going to have ample parking so that they can provide a parking spot for that second?
Yes,
For
they
that
would have
second
to.
unit.
Yes, they would have to comply with the bylaw, so they would have to be able to provide a parking space.
So it's handier for them to know that in advance, right? Then, so I'm just making sure, I don't want us to think, oh, this is all easy peasy, because it's not necessarily. There is some work involved, and I just want to make sure that we all understand what it is we're asking them to do. It's not cut and dry.
Yes, and if I can add, there is a condition that's included. The wording is prior to the building permit being issued, the construction requirements will be confirmed with the municipality. So it gives everyone a chance to sit down and go over the requirements before they get too far into the process.
Good, thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there any concern from staff, regardless whether it's planning or public works or whatever? What if every one of those units created second dwellings? Is there any concern regarding infrastructure then, regardless of whether it's water, wastewater, whatever? Or is the subdivision, is it able to handle, say, double the units if for whatever reason down the road that could happen?
Mr. Barry?
Yes, so I guess first off, the way the Planning Act is written in Ontario is basically it's an as of right thing that anyone can apply for an additional second unit. The purpose of the staff report earlier today with additional units was to tighten some of those requirements just to make sure that it is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. With respect to servicing, even in the current additional unit bylaw, they do have to confirm capacity for the municipal sanitary and municipal water system. So they will be required to submit a servicing brief as part of their permit package for additional units. With respect to density, growth plan exempts second units from density calculations to encourage attainable form of housing. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
I guess it kind of sort of does. So I guess there is an option then for the municipality to say refuse some of these secondary dwellings based on the capacity that's required.
Yes, for health and safety reasons for servicing, if there's not a report from an engineer saying that there's capacity, then yes, they would not be able to get a permit. Generally speaking, the province is trying to encourage these as much as possible. So there are rare circumstances such as servicing where they would not be permitted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor LeBlanc. Pardon me.
The question for wastewater. I think in the past meeting that we had the consultant here, with the present capacity, what we have, without having the new wastewater treatment plant built and amended, we could build 1,600 homes. And we've only allotted, I think it came from the planning department, it was only 740, and that's existing with Meadowwood that's approved. So we're still within the capacity of the existing.
Thank you. Anything further from members of council? All those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion is carried. Next report is validation certificate request. Mr. Barry, we've read this report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
No, I have nothing to add at this time.
I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that the report of the Planning and Development Department dated October 12th, 2021 regarding application B15 2021 for a validation certificate is received, and that council enact a bylaw to make an order under section 57 of the Planning Act for the approval of a certificate of validation for the lands legally described herein. And further, that council grant the request for a certificate of validation and authorize the mayor and municipal clerk to execute the validation certificate for the lands legally described herein. Any questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Bateman.
Just for clarification to either Josh or Mr. Walsh, this property has had quite a bit of soil moved from the 401 construction by Fidelity up to there. My understanding is the final fill permit certificate hasn't come in with all that stuff. Does that impact this at all? Should we know that everything is kosher before doing something like this, or is that impacted by that?
Mr. Barry.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, this is not related to the fill permits process, so that process would continue. This is simply to correct an error on title. These have always been recognized as two legally separate parcels. They've been paying taxes on two separately legal parcels. It's just a question of procedural fairness to correct the title. But I understand that the fill process will continue.
Any further questions from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
Through your chair, to continue on with Councillor Bateman's questions. These are two separate properties, right? Two separate owners.
Correct, they are two separate owners. They have two separate assessment numbers, but legally speaking, with the error in title, they're technically considered one property until we pass the validation certificate.
Oh, they're only one property, so they pass, okay.
Because of an error in title, yes.
Because there was only consent for one property to be used and filled, but the fill got spread over the two of them.
Yes, again, any fill permits processes would still continue. Yeah, this is just a planning at title issue.
Any further questions from members of council? Those in favor? All those, any opposed? Motion's carried. Which brings us to the short-term accommodation rentals official plan amendment. Mr. Walsh, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing further, Mayor?
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson. The council receives the staff report dated October 12th, 2021 regarding short-term accommodation rentals, including an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and draft short-term accommodations licensing bylaw. The council adopt the respective official plan amendment and forward it to the County of Northumberland for its consideration for giving final approval. The council give passing to the respective zoning bylaw amendment pertaining to short-term accommodation rentals and to give public notice of council's decision in accordance with Planning Act regulations. The council received the draft licensing bylaw pertaining to short-term accommodations and direct staff to give public notice of it through advertisement in the newspaper, the Brighton Independent. And the council directs staff to present a STA licensing bylaw at the November Planning Council session, as may be revised in response to comments received through the public consultation process. Is there any discussion from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
I've read the bylaw 3 times. I just have a few concerns. One is the 15% where you use one at 60 meters in the core, one at 120 meters, the other one at 250 meters within the built-up area of Brighton. So if you do a study of all the roads, the linear thing, because before it was circular, now you've changed it to linear. Do you have an estimate on how many Airbnb homes could be in the built-up area of Brighton at this percentage here?
Mr. Walsh.
To the mayor to council, no, I don't have a specific number that I can generate. It will be site specific. So those density calculations, they are remaining to be calculated via an ARC, and that ARC would capture the frontage. And if it's over 50% of the frontage, then the whole of the parcel would be applicable for the purposes of that calculation. So as you can imagine on a parcel fabric map, the lot pattern isn't uniform. So the density will change every time you do the actual number of parcels captured will change each time you do a calculation. So there's no immediate standard answer in response to your question. But out of about 14 homes, there's a potential for 2 STAs. Out of 20, I think there's 3. So it remains at a very low rate at 15%.
Any further questions from members of council? Councilor Bateman.
Just so I understand all the definitions, the whole home STA and there's another, the whole home is one that's just rented out. The owner doesn't live on site, correct?
That's correct. That's when the entire home and the parcel is devoted to purposes of an STA.
And then the occupied one is where the homeowner lives there and just rents out a room or 2 based on the criteria of this.
That's correct.
So any that's existing now, even whole home ones, they would be grandfathered in or not grandfathered in?
There are specific dates inserted into the zoning bylaw and the licensing bylaw. So for occupancy loads, council may recall an updated property standards bylaw in November 2020. That is retroactive, so there's no grandfathering. If you have to have a maximum of of 2 persons per bedroom up to 3 bedrooms. That's maxed out, and there is no grandfathering. For other uses, then the grandfathering date would be June of this year, because that's when the drafts were first introduced. And so I feel that's the appropriate date to start the legal non-conforming date. So there is a little bit of retroactivity there, but based on my familiarity with some planning law, et cetera, and some precedent decisions that once something gets in front of council, then that's oftentimes the start date.
Go ahead.
Just a quick follow, just so the parking would be similar or exactly the same as what we're talking about in second dwellings or second units, regardless if it's a whole occupied or partially, they'd have to have the parking spots to accommodate the number of guests, so to speak, not the number of guests, but how many people are there. Not every guest is going to have a car, but they have to have their on-site parking.
Through the mayor, that's correct. There is one exception in the licensing bylaw that if they want to have overflow parking, they need to get a special permit from the municipality to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess Councillor Bateman kind of asked some of my questions. I had some concerns about the grandfathering and the parking as well. This is a big document. So yeah, I hope we've covered everything. But yeah, my questions were regarding the grandfathering too, as you know, some of the concerns that we've heard over the last year or so. Hopefully they're not overstepped with, you know, 6 guests is not a bad thing. 10, 12, 15 is in these smaller units. So hopefully, hopefully we can, I guess we police that then, do we? How does that work? Does that work through our bylaw department as well?
Mr. Walsh.
Yes, we'll have to make a concerted effort when it comes to enforcing this, and there'll be some additional statutory tools coming forward to council for its consideration, particularly administrative monetary penalty bylaw. That might be very useful in ensuring compliance.
Thank you.
Let me ask a question on that. No?
No.
Okay.
On what?
On the enforcement of a bylaw, if that were to happen. May I ask?
On the enforcement of this bylaw?
Yeah, as far as, yeah, overstepping the, say, the 6 guest maximum. If we were, any enforcement on this bylaw, would that fall the responsibility on the owner, correct? Not on guests?
Mr. Walsh?
That's correct. It applies to the landowner and the licensee, as particular to the wording. And there may be some instances where a long-term tenant has an arrangement with the landowner to be able to operate it as an STA. Not very common, but in that event, then it might be just a matter of revoking the license independent of ownership. In some other cases, depending on the clause in the bylaw, it would just simply be levied against the property if we need to be collecting any provincial offenses, fines, or other monetary penalties.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
This being something new to us, like Councillor Rowley said, this is a very large document, and I guess I want to make sure we have opportunity to make adjustments if need be, because I think, you know, we might need to revisit this. We do want to put something in place. We've seen areas that haven't put something in place early enough, and we run into issues. The idea here is not to stifle anyone's business. It's just to add some rules to keep everything a bit more, I guess, uniform across the board. So I just want to make sure there's opportunity, if need be, to do some tweaking along the way, if need be.
Absolutely. I think at maybe a year's time, it would be useful to evaluate the licenses that have been issued and see how things are operating, review resources available for the purpose of enforcement as well, and come back with an evaluation report for council. And just to also add that the official plan amendment that is recommended for adoption has some clauses in it speaking to intentions, etc. And any bylaw that implements official plan policy can be considered for variance by the Committee of Adjustment as well. So there's some site-specific flexibility there.
Thank you both. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Walsh, you and I have had numerous discussions on this, lengthy, couple of hours. So I'm going to ask some of the questions that I asked you and you asked me to ask you again tonight. One of them is on a liquor permit. Because you said motel, at a motel, when I talk to them, there always is somebody, an attendant that represents the owner at the front desk. So that's why they don't need it. Here, if somebody's running an Airbnb or bed and breakfast and they're present, they wouldn't require one because as part of their owner, they could. But if they're not present, then it's kind of a way, they may require a liquor permit to allow the guests to bring liquor on the premises or something to drink. You didn't look at that question I asked you. The other one is the permits, the parking permit, the licensing. If they're over guests and they have their 2 per bedroom, 3 bedrooms max, you're saying here that they're allowed to have a 1 street parking space on the street. To park on the street, enforced by the bylaw officer between the 1st day of April and the 30th of November, which is non-snow days, or otherwise restricted by the Municipal Parking Act. So how is that going to be for? Is the Airbnb going to be given a parking pass so the individuals can put it in their windshield and keep it? How are we going to regulate that? How do we know the difference that they got 10 or 15 or 20? Like in one place, they had rented, there was 17 cars. And that's just happened in another one. They had 17 in 1 bedroom. So.
Mr. Walsh?
Through the mayor, on the first point, admittedly, I have not given much consideration to alcohol gaming regulations for short-term accommodations, but normally this is considered short-term residential use. And as such, for short-term, this is their residence, in which case they wouldn't need a license and are able to have alcohol on premise. But I'll give that more consideration as we go through the draft licensing bylaw during the public consultation period. On the matter of the parking, yeah, we could look at a dash permit, so that the enforcement officer can see what's authorized to be there or not. Or as a complaint comes in and we have the licensing information in front of us, we'll see where and who was given authority to enjoy on-street parking. That may be sufficient, but I'll give that more consideration during the review of the draft.
And when it comes to grandfathering, this was put in place the 1st of June. So anybody after the 1st of June isn't going to be grandfathered, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the June date is the date that the drafts were first presented to council. So there's a provision in the zoning that talks about zoning compliance, and that date is inserted within that clause.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So will this bylaw be complaint driven, or will it be enforced otherwise?
Through the mayor, yes, it would be like all our bylaws will be complaint driven. If in the event we need to reconsider our enforcement policy, I'll work with the bylaw enforcement officer to look at other options. There may be periods of time seasonally or annually when we may do a roundup, so to speak, and perhaps even give notice saying that our enforcement officer will be treating everyone equally in the light of the bylaw and doing a survey to ensure general compliance.
Thank you. Councillor Bateman?
Just for clarification, and maybe the clerk would know, because I'm not sure where Councillor LeBlanc saw on the parking on the street. I thought we changed parking. I thought I heard you say November 30th. Does our parking kick in for winter parking on the 1st or the 30th? If it's written that way in here, it would have to be. I thought we changed it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think winter parking is 1 November to April 1.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
So-
but I think they'd be allowed on street parking April 1 to November 1. I think that's how it reads.
It's just that after November 1, the guests would have it. That'd be up to the
Every-
SDA owners to tell them you can't park there after, what is it, 7 o'clock?
Everyone gets treated the same. Thank you. Anything further? Councillor LeBlanc?
Yes. Also at 5.3.23. Our noise bylaws go from 7 to 9. And I notice here that you've got it from 6 to 11. Seven to 9. They got it from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
I think it was, anyway, Mr. Walsh.
Sure, I can take the licensing bylaw and coordinate with their general noise bylaw and make sure that they cross-reference better.
No, it's outdoor pools, hot tubs, areas, and other recreational shall not be used before 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. I'll stop. So is that for noise or? I see you got the other one for lighting. All lighting will be shut off at 11. Outdoor lighting will be shut off at 11 p.m.
Yeah, that's for noise.
Councilor Bateman?
It was more of a question of verification. I actually thought the noise bylaw was not after 11 PM and not before 9 AM. I think there might be one day that, but I think maybe I think it's 7 days a week. You have to shut down at 11 PM and you can't do something loud before 9 AM.
We're not passing the licensing bylaw this evening anyway, so you can, staff has an opportunity to take a look at that and make any corrections before bringing it forward to the November meeting.
I appreciate the questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Councilor LeBlanc?
Yes, on 7.7, 7.71 and 7.72. Insurance and 7.73. In the insurance, is there any way that the municipality, when we do the licensing or it comes in, that we make sure that the insurance specify that the owner has told his insurance company it is an Airbnb? Because
Sure.
it makes a huge difference
Mr.
when it
Walsh?
comes to liability.
The current reading is liability insurance of $2 million. And I think liability insurance is probably sufficient to cover, at that rate, it should be sufficient to cover whether it's identified by the insurance firm as an STA or not. But, I can confer with an insurance broker to verify the importance of that distinction.
I already have with 3 insurance companies.
Not your job, sir. We'll get the staff to do their work. Thank you. Anything further from members of council? Councilor Anderson.
So with all these rules and all that, is there it's probably in here, but I've missed it. Is there an inspection prior to licensing?
Mr. Walsh?
Yes, there needs to be an inspection prior to license. Otherwise, it needs to be a license, an inspection for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of council? I do see that members of the public have their hands up. There will be an opportunity for questions during our question period under section 9 of the agenda after we got through the bylaws, just for everyone's information there. So I've read I've read the motion. Any further discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. We have nothing under unfinished business this evening. That takes us into bylaws. First bylaw is the validation bylaw. It's moved by Councilor LeBlanc, seconded by Councilor Bateman. That council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw under provisions of Section 57 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to issue a validation certificate. Any further comment or question on that issue? Those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next is a zoning bylaw amendment for 947 Cameron Road. It's moved by Councilor LeBlanc, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, Being a bylaw under the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to amend bylaw number 140, 2002, as otherwise amended of the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton, as it applies to the lands located at 947 Cameron Road, described as part of Lot 31, Concession 7. Any further discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. The next bylaw is zoning amendment Z09-2021, additional residential units, and we've referred that back to staff, and we'll see that come forward at the November meeting. Our next bylaw is short-term accommodation official plan amendment. The motion is moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Bateman. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to adopt an amendment to the official plan of the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton to implement planning consultations and planning review regarding the land uses of short-term accommodations in the municipality. Any further discussion? Those in favor, go ahead, Councillor Rowley.
Could we have a recorded vote, please?
Certainly. Any further discussion before I go there? Councillor Bateman?
Just a quick question for my own verification. So those existing now that we know about, because I'm sure there may be more Airbnbs or SDAs in our community that we don't know about, because I think that you probably tracked them through the Airbnb site. So if they're not registered on there, once we find out of them going down the road, or staff does, they'll be asked to follow suit with this as well as you identify them, the existing ones that we don't know about now.
Excuse me, yes, that's correct. So they'll have to submit proof of having been operating to show compliance with the grandfathering clauses of the bylaw and the licensing.
Anything further? Madam Clerk, a recorded vote has been requested by Councillor Rowley. Per our procedural bylaw, voting will be in alphabetical order, starting with Councillor Rowley.
Councillor Rowley,
Yes.
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 Yes. Thank you. Our next bylaw is zoning amendment for short-term accommodations, and it's moved by Councillor LeBlanc, and I'll need a seconder. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading, and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw 140/2002 as amended with respect to short-term accommodation dwellings or dwelling units in the municipality of Brighton. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Recorded vote, please.
Thank you. That will happen. Any further comments or questions from members of council? Again, Madam Clerk, a recorded vote has been requested by Councillor Rowley.
Yes.
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 Yes. Thank you. That brings us to question period. Question period is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions about items that have appeared on this evening's agenda. Thank you. Members of the public are asked to state their name for the record before asking their question. A maximum of 5 minutes is set aside for question period. A reminder that language, content, and conduct must remain respectful at all times. Questions will be received and answered by me or by a member of council or staff if designated by me. So first up, that is very far away. Trim.
Hi, yes, thank you, Mayor. My question is related back to the STA bylaw that was just recently passed. And in reviewing the bylaw in its entirety, there seemed to be a lack of clarity contained within the document. There are several areas and subsections where clarity was not provided. And as you're aware, the council meeting on August 18th was fairly heated, and there was commitment by council to provide some clarity in that document and ensure that it was being made to not only be one-sided, but also look after the interests of STA owners, which I believe, perhaps may have been overlooked. Did council obtain a legal opinion from the city solicitor prior to passing this bylaw and reviewing this bylaw in its entirety to get that legal opinion?
Council did not. Staff, did we receive as a municipality a legal opinion?
No, Mayor, we hadn't. I did rely on some precedents that were subject to legal opinion.
From other municipalities?
That's correct.
Thank you. So the answer to your question, Trim, is no.
Okay, do you know if the municipality is going to be going down that road of obtaining a legal opinion to see what the city solicitor would, what opinion the city solicitor would have based on this?
I would suggest that, given that council has passed the bylaw by unanimity this evening, the answer to that question is probably unlikely. I didn't hear any member of council requesting that staff seek a legal opinion on the bylaw.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And is it Nev Kent?
Yes, hello, Nev Kent speaking here. Thank you, council members, for allowing me the floor. I appreciate all the effort that went into drafting the bylaw. I do feel that it is not comprehensive enough because I feel like the city doesn't understand the position that neighbors have versus neighbors. And I can appreciate, Mayor, you just said, we want us to be equal playing field for everyone. We want to make sure that everyone is treated the same. But this bylaw really doesn't read like that. And I want to be very specific about what I'm talking about. And so if you look at page 462 of 494.6, and I'll just read it if you'll just grant me the latitude here. No person shall make noise to cause a disturbance or conduct themselves in a way that is likely to disturb area residents. Example of noise that is likely to cause disturbance to residents at any time include A, loud music, B, outdoor or backyard gatherings, activities involving excessive noise or disruptive behavior, late evening, early morning disruptions, and point D, yelling, shouting, singing, or conversing loudly. While I can appreciate it's an attempt at being comprehensive, what determines what is deemed loud? Where is that quantified? Because you see, there is conflict between neighbors, and this document, I guarantee you, will be weaponized. So I ask council to deliberately select language that is quantifiable and measurable, because under that statement that I just read, by virtue of being a human being outside of an Airbnb, that's a noise infraction. How is that sustainable, measurable, and equitable amongst all neighbors of the community? Because we're people, we make noise. I'm talking right now, would that could be considered noise? It also goes on to talk about nuisances. Well, what's a nuisance? How do we quantify a nuisance? What is the legal definition of nuisance and loud? You understand what I mean? There's no criteria here that is clear, both to people that have an STA and those that are going to seek to hold neighbors accountable if they have an STA. This is not measurable. It even goes on to say things like, anybody that has an STA has to have a waste receptacle that is given by the municipality. Why don't all members of the community need that? I mean, I'm just going to go to Canadian Tire or whatnot and buy a garbage container. I'm not going to make it myself. So why isn't the rest of the community being held to that? Why isn't the rest of the community being held to things like noise and sound? My neighbor loves to blast music out, and heavy metal music, I might add, from his garage on a daily basis. What is preventing them from causing a nuisance and a disturbance to me and my tenants? There is nothing in this document that protects me. It only makes me a target.
Thanks, Deb. I'm going to refer, I'm going to sort of wrap your question into a couple of packages here. One is, what constitutes loud and nuisance, my assumption would be that would be governed by our noise bylaw, but Mr. Walsh, I'll get you to answer that question, please.
Sure, Mayor. The phrases that were being quoted, that's the Renters Code of Conduct. So it's a tool of moral suasion, and the bylaw is structured that Renters Code of Conduct be given to the renters so that there is a clear expectation of appropriate behavior. So
Those items are not enforceable under the bylaw.
right, it's
Right.
not really an enforceable mechanism, but it's one of setting the standard, and there are some clauses of infraction within the licensing bylaw that might directly relate to that. But it would all go back to the noise bylaw.
Well,
And
there's a, sorry,
also, excuse me, I'll finish.
Please do.
And there is within the bylaw also a demerit point system. So if there is a gray territory there where something is potentially enforceable, then there will be simply a strike point or demerit point allocated, and the owner will be so noticed. On the second point, the waste, that simply provision there is simply a waste containerization area to a specification or a design as approved by the municipality upon issuance of the license. So the license will have a site plan showing where waste will be stored and making sure it has tight lids and things like that, because historically STAs have, in some places, resulted in vermin getting into the garbage and garbage being placed in places that get left for extended periods of time and generally causing clean yard concerns. So through proper containerization, we can mitigate that.
the thing is, though, with all due respect, Mr. Walsh, that you mentioned that it's not really enforceable, but it's part of the demerit system. So it is enforceable to some extent because I will be penalized for it. There's even mention of inappropriate odor. Well, how do you measure inappropriate odor? You can't even arrest someone for marijuana back in the day based on odor, and yet it's present in this bylaw. So you can see that I feel like this is very aggressive, slanted towards the STAs, which is surprising to me because the research that you did in the respondents, members of the community were in favor of Airbnbs as long as there was reasonable legislation around it. But this is kind of the nuclear option, right? Like we've gone away from just simple things like noise and occupancy to things like having, a pretty front yard, or things like having a hard driveway versus a non-hard driveway. What is the problem we're trying to solve?
I'm going to have to get you to ask a question here.
So my question is, why have we gone so aggressive here with this STA when we're really trying to solve for things like noise and occupancy, but we went far beyond that? What is the motivation for that? And what is in the interest of the people for that?
I think the intent was, council's intent here was to have some regulation and control over short-term accommodations in the municipality.
I understand that, but it needs to be equitable for everyone. Like noise doesn't travel one way, Mayor.
I understand that. I understand that. And I appreciate that you have some concerns. I know you have some issues with your neighbors in your area, but generally we need to make sure we're passing a bylaw that works for the entire municipality, and in particular the permanent residents of the municipality. So I'm going to go on to the next person because we are well past our 5 minutes. So I'll ask council, are you okay if we get a question from another member of the public? Sam, are you able to read who that is?
Danyar.
Danyar, you
help
joined
you
us
out.
for the public meeting, as I recall.
Yes, Danyar Ahmedjanov. Thank you for giving me the time to ask a question. Just as a side note, I was a little surprised that a lot of the recommendations or concerns that other STA owners have brought up last meeting were not included in the bylaw or the official plan. It seems that all the concerns that we brought up were kind of just dismissed and disregarded. So I'm a little saddened by that. But a question regarding the occupancy and the limit for 3 guest rooms. I'm still trying to figure out an answer for that because, you have houses that have 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms. They're supposed to be inhabited by many people, right? Even if it wasn't for an STA. just understanding why an STA has a, an occupancy limit for 3 people. That's my first question. Sorry, 3 bedrooms.
Mr. Walsh?
To the mayor, to the council, to the mayor, the limit on the overall occupancy loads of a home needed to be maintained in character with typical residential use, give or take some very normal variation. And there was, for practical purposes, need to be, I think, a number drawn into the bylaw for it to be definitive and enforceable. And 6 adults occupying a site for significant duration at one time was deemed to be still within character to a residential use. Beyond that, it would exceed, in my planning opinion, to no longer be typical of a residential use. And that is where the number laid down.
So is it just based on something that you perceive to be what a typical residential use is, right? And you said there's a variation, right? So there are neighbors who have 2 families living together.
We're not here to engage in debate.
Right, no, I'm just trying to understand because a lot of the cottagers that come to Brighton come with families, 2 families together perhaps, and it can easily exceed 6 adults, right? We have a place that has 6 bedrooms. I mean, it was built for the purpose of housing 2 families together, right? During non-STA use of the premise. So that's why, I don't understand the limit, right? Like the limit, we are following the Ontario Building Act by only having 2 adults per bedroom, but we have 6 bedrooms, right? Like it seems arbitrary. The second point, and I brought it up last time and nothing was done about that. The second point was, sometimes guests make noises. Sometimes they can bring uninvited guests. Who's going to be penalized for, the guests breaking the rules? And that's part of the problem we have is like, we want to reduce the number of partying because we come and enjoy the cottage ourselves as well. We don't want to find it broken and, having beers everywhere. We don't like that. And likewise, we want to make sure our neighbors are happy and we ask our guests not to bring many people, right? So if they do, and they are the ones breaking laws or the bylaw here, who is the penalty given to? Is it still going to be the STA owners? Because it's very, very frequent that, they'll bring one more guest. It's a very easy offense that they will do. And it's going to be impossible to enforce by the STA owners other than just writing it everywhere, which we already do in our case, for example.
My reading of the information suggests it will be the licensee that is punished, but Mr. Walsh, can you confirm or otherwise?
That's correct, Mayor. It'll be the licensee, which oftentimes will be the landowner, of course, but ultimately it is the licensee / landowner's responsibility for the nuisance that they might be introducing. And so they need to make sure that they communicate that well, whoever their tenant might be.
Right. But you understand, right? Like we're not doing it on
Danyar,
purpose.
no one interrupted you, Mr. Walsh.
If I recall, Danyar also had expressed concerns in some of the provisions in the official plan amendment referring to a maximum of 15 days. To add some clarity to that, that is the number of days that you're permitted per season to rent out your cottage without needing an STA license. So it's acknowledging that it's normative in cottage country, it's in particular for people to rent out their cottage to family and friends. And for 2 weeks of each season, a license isn't required.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I mean, I still don't get a clear answer to the concerns being we can't do much as an STA when a guest does these things, loud noises or tries to break noise bylaws, etc. And it seems like we will be the ones penalized, right? Like I would like to see something in the bylaw that would help protect STA owners who actually want to do good business, that actually want to ensure the neighbors are happy. And it seems like, okay, we'll just put all the blame on the STAs and let them figure it out, right? And like we're trying to do it as like we're trying to be good neighbors as much as other people, right? And that's, I guess, the part that makes it hard to think that this bylaw is equitable in any way for the SDA owners. But that's it for my side in terms of questions.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Do you see anyone else up there? That's it. Right. So we have received questions provided by email from Melissa. It looks like Melissa Pollock and Raphael Bissessar, and they are as such. Is the 3A with reference to something in the licensing, do you know? Okay, so I'll just read it as is. 3A, our property is located on Harbor Street and operated as an Airbnb for 3+ years. Does this apply? It is our vacation property, not our principal residence. What is the core district? That might be the second question. So I think this is with regard 3A, you know what they're referencing there? For the public record, I'm going to read these into the public record, and then Ms. Doran, I'll ask you to forward these questions to Mr. Walsh, and Mr. Walsh will ask you to get back to the residents. But because they have asked me to read the questions, I will read them in for the public record, but ask you to get back to them directly by email. What is the core district? We have a secondary building or bunkie season unit adjacent to our primary building operating for 3+ years. Can we continue to use it? What is a type B use? Parking. Can we park in front of our property that is adjacent to the Ontario Street dock on Harbor Street? We have 20-foot cedars between us and the properties next to us. Do we still need to build a fence? Our property does not have a backyard and the entire green space faces Harbor Street. How does this affect us as a short-term rental? Does it require us to build privacy fencing or additional separation? And what we'll do, as noted, Raphael, is we'll ask, and Melissa, pardon me, we'll ask the clerk to whom you have sent these questions to forward them to the Director of Planning, who will respond to you or have someone in his department respond to you, so you have answers to those questions. Okay, thank you, everyone. We have no in-camera session this evening, which brings us to our confirmatory bylaw. With a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson, that Council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton Council meeting held on October 12th, 2021. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Being unopposed, the motion is carried. And a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that the October 12th, 2021 planning meeting adjourn at 7:58 p.m. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. For those of you who are already home, appreciate your attendance. For those of you who are driving home, drive safe.